Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for a conversation around diversity and inclusion. My name is Chrissy Sprouse, and I am grateful to be serving as chair of the University Staff Advisory Committee this year. USAC is an advisory body to President Johnson and other university leadership, comprised of members from across the university, medical center, and extended campuses. Our mission is to maintain an active and participatory line of communication with the university community and to provide a forum through which staff can raise, discuss, and make recommendations to support the university's mission. USAC leadership created a multi-year plan to help foster consistency in our vision and focus, and our mission will remain consistent, advocating on behalf of staff. Throughout this academic year, USAC continued our theme with preparing staff for change during this time of unprecedented organizational, procedural, budgetary, societal injustices, and leadership change by increasing our communication efforts via our monthly USAC newsletter, in addition to our social media accounts, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and by providing a forum such as today. For today's webinar, we will hear directly from staff and the challenges faced in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Questions were collected from administrators and the staff community, and several themes will be addressed, such as actions needed for positive change, how to have these difficult and meaningful conversations, and addressing disparities among units. Please note, all attendee microphones are muted, cameras are turned off, and the chat feature has been disabled. The Q&A tool will be monitored throughout the webinar for follow-up questions. Please feel free to submit questions throughout today's webinar. Questions will be addressed towards the last several minutes of our time with the staff and also throughout our webinar. For any questions not addressed during our time, we will be sure to share these with the staff for follow-up. For closed captioning, please select the CC icon found at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. This discussion will be recorded and posted to the USAC website. If you have any technical issues, please contact Lauren Gannon-Evans, Randall McKenzie, or Drew Miller. Dr. James Moore, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, will be moderating and facilitating today's discussion with our panelists, which include Stephen Mentz, Learning and Development Coordinator within the Office of Human Resources, Regina Robinson Easter, Executive Assistant to Dean Trevor Brown, John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and Temple Patton, Diversity and Inclusion Manager and Business Program Coordinator at the Lima campus. And at this time, I would like to turn today's conversation over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you for coordinating a very important meeting, a discussion on a topic that I think we should continuously have throughout the university, particularly with our staff. The staff are viable, important entities of our university, helping the university realize its vision and mission. So I just thank you all for being the ambassadors and being the voices of reason, if you will, for our staff. Again, I want to stress to those who are tuning in today to submit your questions to the Q&A function of Zoom. We really want this panel discussion to be lively, but we want you to feel like your questions are answered. We've developed a script of questions that we will present to our panelists, but we would much rather take questions from the audience. Well, let me begin. Temple, Regina, and Stephen, thank you for being here. And so let's begin the conversation. Let's try to be as candid as possible, but I don't think we'll have a problem with this. When they selected you all, I knew that they selected the right people because candor is something that we would certainly associate with each and every one of you. My first question, and we'll start with Regina, and then we'll go to Stephen and then Temple. My first question, what do you want Ohio State to be known for as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. What do I want OSU to be known for as far as DEI? I want them to be known as a premier institution in that area. We focus a lot on, we have as far as teaching and research, but I think it's imperative that if we want to be a premier institution, a leading institution, that we incorporate that and we actually, the emphasis that we place on research and teaching, that we also emphasize DEI at the same level. And we will definitely, by doing that, we will definitely reap the returns on having that as a key component, just as we are very highly focused on research as well as being leading as far as teaching nationally.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here. As far as what I think OSU should be known for as it relates to DE&I, to echo what Regina said, we are a leading institution in many areas, research, healthcare, athletics. There is no reason why we can't be a leader in DE&I as well. We need to accept that this isn't going to happen overnight. We need to stay focused. We need to address the bad things. We need to acknowledge the good, and we need to accept our progress along the way, no matter how major or minor. We have a lot of great people that make up this institution: faculty, staff, administrators, and of course, our students. I think we need to give everyone a voice and make sure that everyone feels heard and accepted in being part of our environment, in our culture. I think the more we focus on that, the more we'll actually be able to live up to our stellar reputation, not only in Columbus, but really across the world. And I think we can do that. I think we just need to stay focused and we need to be diligent in our work.
Thank you. Thank you. Temple.
I would like Ohio State University to be known as a university that is truly committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the university units, and that our commitment is not siloed and contained to ODI staff and departments. Diversity and inclusion it's a huge weight to bear for people of color who live with discrimination every day, personally every day, but to also bear the brunt of the work professionally. So I think, my wish would be that all of Ohio State University is truly committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Stephen, how would you characterize your DE&I experience at The Ohio State University? How would you characterize your DE&I experience at The Ohio State University?
So I always try to be an advocate for DE&I. It is something that, as a member of the LGBTQ community, that I do experience a bit of. One of the things that I've been most surprised about in terms of DE&I is how many times people still ask to speak to a man when it comes to certain topics, and or they think that I have all of the answers because I'm not just a male but a white male. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot more than many people give me credit for, but that's not because of my race or gender. It's because I've had great mentors along the way at Ohio State, and many of which are female. And human resources is not a male-dominated profession, at least not at Ohio State. And so that line of thinking is both flawed and offensive in many ways. And many times I have to redirect their question to one of my female coworkers or leaders anyway. So I think we still have a very old school mindset when it comes to certain things that I'm on one end of it, and I can't imagine how some of our students or other staff may feel when it may be employees of color or other marginalized groups of people. So it's one of the things that I've been surprised to have to be faced with at Ohio State, because we are a pretty diverse community, but just being on the end of things where someone would rather talk to me because I'm a man, it not only baffles me, but it offends me as well.
Thank you. Temple, how would you characterize your DE&I experience?
It was very challenging from the beginning of the position, and to also be the only woman of color on the senior leadership team. I had to ask several times why I wasn't included on the website. I had to fight for a seat at the table, but I was appointed by a woman of color. And our dean at the time. And I feel that after last summer that my position is more respected. I'm more respected. I don't think they saw the importance of our work until last summer, which is to me sad to say, but I can tell there's a real shift and more questions asked from me, more responsibilities, but also that respect just seemed to be increased after last year.
Dina, how would you characterize your DE&I experience?
Here at the university, what I would say is that I found that oftentimes in my type of role that I've been, or the level of my role, I've been the first. Oftentimes I'm the only one in that space. So I find that oftentimes I have to be mindful and temper, what I need to say to address concerns. I found that in some of the capacities I worked in, and that as far as DEI is concerned, that even though that wasn't my position per se, that I was the person who was trying to be the advocate in that space. So, and I would have to say, I agree with Temple that since last year, we definitely have seen some shifts and some changes, which of course, you want to see progress, you want to see changes, you want to see things be better. But I hope that, I guess my concern is that we can't let it be a moment thing, and that it has to be something that was a match that was struck, and that it's going to keep going until we get to a much better place to where people feel valued, and I'm not the only person in that space, or I'm not the person. I can actually come and have discussions and be my authentic self in those discussions, not being completely concerned with, okay, am I being, is my tone appropriate? Are my facial expressions acceptable? Is my hair appropriate? All those things that right now, I am very cognizant of when I go into spaces. But for me, that's been my DEI experience since I've been at the university. And, I've been here for a while. I left, came back. So clearly it's not that it was terrible. or else I wouldn't have come back. But definitely I came back because I know there is potential. And I think with that potential, you know, we can't just have the potential, but we got to put things into action. So that's been my DEI experience, and I'm looking forward to it being better.
Well, thank you. And one of the questions that came from the audience, they wanted us, we are using acronyms, D, E, and I. The D stands for diversity, the E stands for equity, and the I stands for inclusion. You both highlighted, you took us back down memory lane, and some of us may not know what you're referencing until last year. What was it about last year that fostered greater awareness and willingness to learn more about different experiences? And why did it take so long? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and that's sort of like a toss-up question. I know, Regina, you talked about last year, and I know, Temple, you talked about last year. Help the audience to understand, what are you referencing? And how did whatever you're referencing created a groundswell that make it, I guess, your experience more authentic than what it was?
Okay. Want Regina or I to go first?
Sure, you go, Temple.
Okay. I'll say what happened last year was after COVID-19, and we were, you know, kind of contained to our homes, and the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. We started to have open dialogue discussions on the Lima campus. Couldn't be silent about what was happening, even though we weren't on campus. And I think that is, that created this shift, and also this respect that I was referring to after last summer. There were things that we were able to push through that had been challenges up until last year, pushback or either ignored requests to make diversity training requirements for new employees, student workers, mentors, leaders of student organizations, faculty and staff. So we did get that pushed through last summer after those events happened. We were able to put diversity statements to get those into faculty syllabi. That was another challenge before last summer that the diversity committee was able to accomplish last year. And diversity training for search committees. I had already served on search committees for staff positions, but not for faculty positions. So that was another thing. We were able to get diversity training, and also for ODI, meaning me, representation on all search committees now. And those things created more respect. And also the community started to contact Ohio State Lima for direction and for training and resources for the community as a result of that. So that increased our work and also the ask from the community and the campus community.
Thank you. Regina, anything to add?
Of course, I referenced that same time point in which I began to see a shift. And I think, as Temple mentioned, part of it is actually individuals really being put in a position to where discussion had to take place. And I found that part of, I think what's interesting is that I think what we all saw on TV basically was a moment in time in which we could not use revisionist history. We had to see what happened and actually address it. And I think that experience caused us to be able to have those more engaging and more in-depth, not surface conversations. And with that, I think that we began to get more allies. And so, one thing about it with a marginalized population, you can't be successful unless you have allies. And so I think part of the shift came from the fact that because people began to become aware, people began to educate themselves, began to have those hard, crucial, critical conversations, then that definitely contributed to the shift. And I'm going to repeat this again. My hope is we do not stop those conversations, that we continue those conversations, because if we let the wind out, we will be back to square one or further back, in my opinion.
Thank you. And I'd like to circle back to this in a few minutes, but I want to pitch this question to, Stephen, and this comes from the audience. Seemingly, this particular person noted that in these kind of discussions, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, race is always one of the salient topics. And then another topic, according to the individual that submitted the question, LGBTQ is a topic that is emerged. But this person wants to know, when are we going to talk about another construct, identity construct, that is often suppressed, but all of us can be a part of it based on a life tragedy, and that's disability, individuals with disabilities. When do you think we're going to start to have greater conversations around individuals with disabilities?
I think they should have already happened. I think it's easy for people to focus on what they know when it comes to DE&I. And I think those are where our blind spots lie. And I think we need more awareness over all of the things we're facing. And I think one of the struggles as a university is that we are too reactive when it comes to certain issues, and we are not proactive enough. And the more we focus on reacting to things is the more we're going to drop the ball on, the more things that are going to be left behind. And any progress we make will be lost because we'll be too busy cleaning up chaos from the reaction of something. And so whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, whatever it may be, these conversations should have already happened. And I think forums like this are great for awareness, but we need to make sure that there's someone in the audience that can do something about it. Ohio State is very much, when it comes to implementing change, it's very much a top-down approach. So it needs to start from our president. It needs to start from our board of trustees. Our board of trustees I think we need better diversity in our board of trustees. I think the trustees need to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. They have other committees, but DE&I is not one of them. And I'm not sure why, but hopefully from this conversation, one of those committees can be formed. But if these conversations haven't started happening yet, now is a great time to do so. But we've already lost enough time. We can't really afford to risk losing any more. And the more we delay on addressing these issues, the more we're going to lose exceptional talent, because people aren't going to want to work for a place that isn't diverse and inclusive of everybody. We have the potential to do this right. We have the resources to do this right. So let's do it.
So You know, Stephen, from your perspective, what is preventing us from doing it? If we have the resources, what is preventing us from taking things to scale?
I don't know. I don't see a reason why we can't do this or haven't done it already. I think things get done at Ohio State when it's important enough to the right people. So it probably just hasn't affected the right person yet, which is unfortunate.
Wow. Any other thoughts from anyone else?
Yes, I'll add to that. We have L. Scott Listener out to the campus at least once a year, at least before COVID. And the last visit, we had him meet with the dean. He presented the workshop, and then we actually had diversity committee members and the dean and facilities walk the campus with him so he could tell us what we were doing right, what we weren't doing right, and then send a report to facilities. So that is a way, I think, to start that conversation. If you have the workshop, you could have a dialogue discussion afterwards. But it gave us a lot of time to talk about things that people that are not disabled don't think about. And like you said, if it doesn't affect you, usually something's not going to happen until something does happen to you. But it was a very interesting and, really opened my eyes to what we take for granted after taking that walk with him and telling us, about our doorways and how they need to be this size for this. And, your parking lot needs this and things that we take for granted. But that's one way we try to tackle that diverse, trying to be inclusive and also keep in mind our disabled students, faculty and staff on campus.
What is the most significant diversity, equity, inclusion resource from your perspectives available to staff? And I want you to zero in, if you need to take a pause to kind of reflect. What is the most significant diversity, equity, inclusion resource for staff? All right, now we let's stop the silence. Who would like to share?
Okay, I'll go. You guys are quiet. I'll say, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. There are so many resources, and also the Office of Institutional Equity. I refer a lot of employees to that office. We've had workshops on our campus. We had Molly Perano come and present to us in, I believe it was September, October last year. And that's something that we will do every year to make sure that students, faculty, and staff know how to report, discrimination, whether that be racial or sexual harassment, any of those, and then we have faculty members who aren't able to attend those, who call our office and say, who do I report this to? So the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with Dr. Moore's leadership, that gives us that direction and, the top down, that they know that we're a great resource for those types of things. The only thing is I find that employees, when I direct them to either the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, or if there's an issue, the Office of Institutional Equity, that they're fearful of retaliation. And so there needs to be a way that there is a way to report without that fear, because otherwise, as Regina said before, it's just going to go back to what it was before. If you have an employee who's not trusting Ohio State University to keep things so their supervisors can't retaliate, and managers can't retaliate, then they're going to keep this to themselves and things are going to just keep happening the way that they have been.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I will echo all of that. I think the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the Office of Institutional Equity are great resources for bringing awareness of these issues. I think the Multicultural Center is another great resource as well. And I think USAC has done a great job of listening to individuals' concerns and hosting forums like this. In addition to people being afraid of retaliation, they are also not confident that anything's going to happen. So the timeliness of addressing concerns, lack of follow-up to those that bring about concerns, like what happens to the issues when we bring them up? It just sometimes it just seems to get lost in space. There's a lack of communication there. And so I think we also need to make sure that our resources have the resources that they need to keep providing all of this to us.
Well, Stephen, this is a question directed at you, and others feel free to weigh in, and they said specifically to you. And this is the perspective of one of the individuals in the audience, seemingly that the LGBTQ community is overlooked. It's an invisible group in terms of being reached out to and being affirmed. What do we need to do to provide more resources and more visibility to the issues that the community experiences at the Ohio State University?
I think that can get tricky sometimes because that's not something that you ask people. So I think in some ways you may be including them and not knowing it. There are times that I, excitedly or flamboyantly tell them that I'm part of the LGBTQ community so that, they know that we're being represented. But I think making sure that the organizations that we have to support the LGBTQ population at Ohio State also has the resources and visibility that they need in order to thrive. We have out at OSU, there's, Scarlet and Gay. There are resources in place for LGBTQ employees. I think we need to just make sure that, we're bringing them to the table and that they have a voice and that they're voicing their concerns. Because there are people of color that are also LGBTQ members. There are disabled employees that are also LGBTQ members. So there are many populations that are overlapping here. And I think this is a great way for all of them to come together and put on a very strong presence in our university. But I think we just need to make sure that we're reaching out to all of those groups and inviting them to these discussions.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I just want to share within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, one of the most difficult things in an office like ours is that to help shatter myths and share the realities that everybody that we serve don't look like me. It's hard to demystify that. Many of our students are transgender and they come from, they're very engaged in the LGBTQ community. I'm probably one of the few organizations. I just met with one of our donors 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. Him and his partner created a scholarship and they want to make the life of LGBTQ community a lot better, particularly for students. We support a lot of different programs, but oftentimes in an office like this, they don't always recognize us when we make contributions, and our office is omitted. And sometimes, not that we want to toot our own horn, but if you don't see our brand, our logo, people automatically assume that you don't care about something. We're trying to create an inviting space, and it's a lot of hurt and a lot of marginalization. I don't want to say Ohio State owns all of it, but is Ohio State, it's hard to leave outside of the parameters of the university. Outside of the university, we bring those experiences to the institution. And so some of the things, it is tricky. And how do you identify members of the community? Some individuals don't feel comfortable sharing, and that's their right. But the most important thing, I think, as being a counselor by training and training masters and PhD students, how do we create an inviting space where people feel welcome? Oftentimes people evaluate you early and they determine whether or not they're going to engage, particularly if you come from communities that are consistently marginalized. How do we create the space, a more inviting space? How do we make the institution more ideal for everyone? There's a saying that I often see in one of my colleagues' email signature, and says, Buckeyes help Buckeyes. And someone said, kind of had a rebuttal to that. Buckeyes help some Buckeyes. Buckeyes support some Buckeyes. And that was kind of, I listened. I didn't try to refute it because that is a personal experience. But I want to know from you all, getting back to you, not about me, how do we make the institution more ideal for everyone? And let's stay focused more on the staff, because I don't want to just get so loosey-goosey, because this is specifically about staff. So how do we make the institution more ideal for all staff at The Ohio State University? And we welcome any ideas or perspectives. I'll start with you, Regina, because I can see your muse, and it looks like you have a lot to say about that.
What I would say is that the biggest thing I think needs to happen is that we have to really acknowledge and own there is a problem. You can never move away from a situation if you refuse to recognize that there's a problem. There's something that we need to address here. And I think once we do that, then we move to having really good conversations and coming to the table with the expectation that, one, I may not agree with everything you say, but I'm giving you the space to say what you have to say. And one thing that's really important to me is that, we have to learn how to be reflective. And I say that to say that oftentimes, I may not agree with everything you say, but if I have a reflective moment, if I'm able to step away from the conversation and mull it over, most often I come back with a different, my position may stay the same, or it may shift, or I may say like, well, you know what, now I have a greater understanding. I think part of it is that what we don't know, we don't know. Oftentimes we like to stay in our comfort zones. We are lazy, in which we use stereotypes to help us guide our relationships, and who we will engage with and who we won't engage with. And so I think that it's just imperative that if we want to move forward, especially for staff, is that we have to open up spaces where you can actually come and have these conversations for us to be better. And not just have conversations, but actually have actionable plans put into place. Set up standards, set up expectations for these spaces where we have these conversations. And definitely we would have to have administrators and leaders who are invested in staff. I understand that you want us to stay focused on staff, and I do recall, I've looked at a number of strategic plans, oftentimes that have been handed down from senior leadership. And to be honest with you, I've never seen a strategic plan that actually highlighted staff. And I understand that faculty are critical. They're the ones who teach our students, but they too, they need to also know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a whole nother thing, because I feel like the staff and leadership oftentimes are the ones who are required to carry or have the expectation and the standards that we must be accountable to. But oftentimes that's not always the same standard and expectation for faculty, but that's a whole nother subject. As far as staff is concerned, I think that we need leadership to recognize and value. One of the values is that, there should be integrity and there should be trust, but show us we matter. Show us that you value us. And I think that if the leadership does that and begins to be the group, the catalyst for helping us move to a different direction, I think we will be better off. But I think we really need leadership to value staff, which will cause them to make changes, which will cause them to implement policies that are beneficial for staff as well. There's always a super focus on faculty, but I definitely believe that it's imperative that there's a focus on staff as well.
I certainly agree, and particularly being in an organization that the majority of the individuals who are employed in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion are staff. And it's very important that we listen and learn and be sponges, but not just listen and learn. How do we move from conversations, or when do we move from conversations into action, right? I think many of the things that you all are sharing is not new. What fatigues me is that, we're recording this, but I bet if we come back a year later, we probably be saying the same thing. Just like with George Floyd, I think that's what we were referencing on May 25th in 2020 that occurred. And the irony of it is May 25th, 1970 was when the Office of Diversity and Inclusion was founded. 50 years ago, when George Floyd occurred. This is the first time I ever said that publicly, right? It dawned on me a couple of months ago, but what I would like to say, ask the question, Temple, when do we turn conversations into action? Because people are tired and fatigued. They're suffering from trauma, from what I've been told. And this is not what I made up. I mean, I'm the co-chair of the Task Force on Racism and Racial Inequities, and we heard this from people. And guess what? It wasn't just people of color that we heard these things from. We heard it across race, across special populations. So, Temple.
I will say there's definitely been a shift with President Johnson. we can feel that there is a shift. She's making some great strides in her short time, but staff are anxious about when it's going to trickle down to them. When is this going to turn into action? What is the task force going to do to help me? And I think what we can do right now, these DEI needs to be incorporated into annual reviews, performance evaluations, and overall goals across the university. And it should not be the departments and the people in those departments should not be solely our responsibility to lift up the university to be an inclusive environment for everyone. And I think if you make the workshops, the number of events attended, questions could be easily added to the employee performance evaluations. I just had this one-on-one conversation with the dean, and he's like, how do we change this? I said, where are your questions? Why don't we have diversity and inclusion in everything that we do. It should be on those performance evaluations. And if you're not doing what you should be doing, that should be tied to your salaries. That's the only way we're going to change, make a real change, so we're not having this conversation in 2030 and 2040. I think if you require at least 2 each year, and I think supervisors and managers should be held to higher standards. They should be required to attend 4 to 6, either workshops or conferences or ODI events and webinars. And ODI offers a plethora of resources. So there's no excuse why this cannot be done and why it cannot be done immediately. I say starting our performance reviews haven't been done. I said, why don't we start now? Why don't we put those in the questions right now? If they've been done, okay, autumn semester for your annual reviews. And if it's truly a goal of the university, then we should have it in the annual reviews. And that should be a tangible goal for everyone. Why is it only a goal for those that, honor diversity and inclusion? So we should see the number of employees of color increase consistently over a 5-year period. We should see them in management positions. I don't know how many times I've heard while I'm sitting on a search committee, well, this person doesn't have management experience. Well, how are they going to get management experience if we keep passing them over? And if you're one voice on a search committee, your voice doesn't say enough to get that pushed through. We need to have a mentorship program to lift up these. If we have employees of color, recruit from within. How long have these loyal, employees been at the university in these entry-level positions and have not gotten into these management positions, but then you hire someone else in the university, a new person who may not be diverse or even value diversity and inclusion, to then take over that department and look over it. That would also increase retention, which, as Dr. Moore talked about how poorly retention is in those entry-level positions and also at the medical center. So I think if we're truly honest about wanting diversity and inclusion for everyone across the university, that we're going to see action and culture surveys where nothing happens. And people are tired of listening to talk. They're saying, what am I going to get from that webinar? Nothing's going to change. And there are things we can do to make change.
Well, certainly I appreciate that. And I see we have a number of questions from the audience. So it's clear there's a lot of excitement around this topic, and people came because they have questions. And hopefully this won't be the last time that we get to come together. I think one of the questions, I would be remiss if I didn't try to respond to it the best of my ability. One of the questions came from one of the audience members highlighting that University of Maryland, as well as University of Michigan, having university-wide diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plans. And the question is, when is OSU going to step up for the and produce a strategic plan? Let me say from my perspective, and this was the intent, and it was a different approach. OSU is there's not a void of plans at the Ohio State University. And anyone who wants to debate me with that, I can certainly go in my Rolodex. There's so many plans and metrics, but I think we all become fatigued. But one of the things I can say I have observed since I've been an administrator at Ohio State is that a lot of the plans are not aligned and or they're not crosswalked. So you have an HR plan, you have a research plan, you have an academic plan, you have an enrollment plan, but no one crosswalk all these plans where we can leverage our human, financial, and technological resources to scale. Now, we created a plan in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion just for the office, because a lot of units who lay out big plans, sometimes they don't have a plan within their office to be able to carry out a big plan. And believe this, being in an office of diversity and inclusion is not perfect, it's not utopia, because what people don't understand, they just assume that it's utopia. When you have a variety of different perspectives, it's hard to get people to agree. But we believe when you have various perspectives, the product will be a whole lot better. Now, it's painful because you want to get things completed, because you have this various perspectives that we can't get closure. So even within our office, that I have learned from doing the task force work, that the group can almost be monolithic. The group can almost look just alike. And it does not mean that the environment is going to be less likely to be toxic. There are a lot of people who don't feel included in the spaces where they work every day. That's what I learned. So I would say to the audience in the task force, I see, if the president sees fit, that there will be a strategic diversity plan for the entire enterprise. And I think it gives us a better chance because we have all these other plans to crosswalk. Now, people have plans. I just want you to say, and I'm going to shut my mouth because I want to make sure I leave some time for Chrissy to close out. Because these universities have plans, don't mean that they do better than we do. So I think people in the academic space, we do white papers, we do data. The data is only as good as you can interpret it. It's only as good as you can develop a plan, an action plan that addresses the shortfalls in the data. So the other thing is that we are constantly confronted in an era that we now use the term anti-racism. That's a common sort of like that's a term that was dormant for years, and now it's emerged as every time you see every bestseller book in diversity inclusion, anti-racism is going to be the term. When I was in Europe 10 years ago, they were still using that. I was like, that's kind of antiquated. We don't say that term that much in the States, and it came back, and now everybody's saying anti-racism. Many people have many explanations and reasons, and these are things I want you to think about, not that I have the answers. Usually when you have a personal experience, it becomes the experience of the whole entire enterprise. That's why the local level is important, because we'll say the Ohio State is this, and we don't put a face on who are we referencing when we say the university, when each and every one of us represent the Ohio State University. Well, I know we don't have too much time, and I promise that we will leave and we try to answer, but I promise if Chrissy is willing, and if you all want me to come back, we'll certainly continue this discussion. But more importantly, what one of the audience members presented to us, I hope that we can move to action, and that's what keeps me hopeful. Ohio State is probably not as good as it thinks it is, but it's probably not as bad. I know I can say from where I sit, there are a lot of universities, and I would say we're probably, even with all our flaws, we're still probably one of the best in the country. And I don't say that because someone paid me to say that, because I got tenure, so I don't have to get paid to say something. I'm going to say, try to be truthful. I believe we all have an opportunity to make this place more ideal. And I believe that diversity, equity, inclusion, we can't take things to scale if we don't work together. And when we hear one group feeling like they're marginalized, then that's a threat for all groups to be marginalized. And so I stand ready as being the vice provost and the CDO of this wonderful university that is always in progress to work with each and every one of you. And I now yield the balance of my time to Chrissy. I thank each one of our panelists for sharing their hearts and soul. And I thank you for your contributions to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion at The Ohio State University. Chrissy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Moore. I know we're just about at time, but I just wanted to provide a few seconds if there are any final words from our panelists. Stephen, do you have anything?
I think what we're wanting to achieve is not unachievable. I think not only do we all have an opportunity to get this right, but we all have a responsibility to do our part to make this right. I think we need to listen to understand and not listen to react. I think we need to make sure that we're doing our part to make sure people are heard, to voice our concerns, and to know that, we are part of this university. It's not just our senior leadership. It is not just our faculty. We are part of this community. And I think we all need to do a better job of recognizing that and appreciating that.
Great. Regina?
I just want to say that, we definitely identify some areas in which we need some work. But the great thing that I appreciate that Steve said is that we actually have the resources to actually address the problem. It would be a bad thing to have a problem and not have the resources to address it, but we have the resources to address it. And I'm just looking forward to us actually putting those resources into action to address it.
Great. Temple?
Thank you again for asking me to serve on the panel today. But I would say to create action immediately, as we were talking before, look at the number of employees of color, their positions, credentials, and evaluate by conducting safe, confidential one-on-one meetings with these employees. Ascertain how they perceive Ohio State, how they perceive working for the Ohio State University, and if they feel valued as employees. And if they believe the university truly honors diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why or why not. That's something else I think that we could put in our performance evaluations. If the employee would feel that this would be a safe space and a safe way to actually give their experience. And I think that that's a way that we could make things better for staff members. Thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. Moore, any final words?
No, I stand ready to work with each and every one of you, and I hope everyone is safe with their families. I look forward to holding hands with you to make Ohio State a better place. I look forward to having the biggest party possible with you, because we all have experienced some degree of trauma. We lost our connection. We lost our way in many ways, but it gave us a lot of time to reflect and to what kind of person we want to be, what kind of society we want to be. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you to create the society that I know we can create.
Well, thank you, Dr. Moore, for facilitating today's discussion. Stephen, Regina, Temple, thank you for being so open and honest in your conversation today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We did capture questions that were not asked during the webinar, and they'll be shared with the panelists, and we will be following up. Again, this will be posted to our USAC website, And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Moore.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.